And if you overlay that European growth curve with the US growth curve, you can see that we've cleared what we call crossing the chasm in the entrepreneurial world, and we're entering into the same steep trajectory as the Europeans hit. It's just that we're about 10 to 12 years behind. And people ask me, well, where are we on the European curve? And I would point on a volumetric basis to the intersection that's right around 2011. So we're catching up. We're still about a decade behind, but we're following that trajectory. So for me, that says, we're not going to stop now. We've reached the tipping point, and we're going to get into a near vertical growth curve over the next 10 years.
This is the Mass Timber Group Show. I'm Nick.
And I'm Brady, and we talk to sustainable building experts. Today we caught up with Pete Kobelt, the Director of Mass Timber Solutions for StructureTone, a $12 billion international construction company that's putting a giant stack of chips on the mass timber industry. Pete himself has deep roots in mass timber and in fact was part of the first CLT commercial building that was built here in the United States. He then went on to start and work with several mass timber manufacturers, both here and in Europe. Pete took us through the history, current state, and the incredible future that awaits the North American mass timber market.
There aren't very many people with as much experience in mass timber than Pete Kobelt. He's worked with SmartLam, Katerra, and was a mass timber consultant for over a decade. Now, he's leading teams at StructureTone. Currently, they are managing the 3 largest mass timber construction projects on university campuses in the entire United States.
But before we jump in, if you like hearing sustainable building experts share their insights, stories, and experience, then please hit that subscribe button. So with that, let's get into it.
Hey everyone, this is Pete Kobelt. I'm currently the Director of Mass Timber Solutions for StructureTone Southwest, which is one of the portfolio companies of StructureTone Building Group, a very innovative employee-owned $12 billion international general contracting and construction management firm that has made a profound commitment to getting out in front on mass timber. And I'm helping lead and build expertise across all our companies around US, Canada, Dublin, and London currently. And I've been at this specific role for about a year and a half.
And how did you first get into mass timber?
Well, that's a long story, so I'm glad we have about an hour. I'm fortunate enough to be both a U.S. and Swiss citizen, and I have family ancestry reflected behind me in Swiss forestry. But that was a couple generations ago. I took a trip. I was invited because of my European connections and friends and colleagues on a trip that was sponsored by the Binder family and Michael Weinig Equipment Manufacturing many years ago. And they were looking to create business in the US. And I was fortunate enough to get the golden ticket invite. And I went over for about 10 days and saw really the future of wood processing as I perceived it. And a big part of that was mass timber manufacturing and construction and design and engineering. And I was so inspired that I came back to Montana, where I was living at the time, and convinced a client to let us import a small building that he needed to build in Whitefish, mixed use, 2-story city infill building. And, we pulled it off, and none of us really knew what we were doing. And it was at that time that I was convinced that this could be a part of the future, and that Montana might actually be a good place to start the manufacturing. And maybe we can get to that later, but eventually we started the first mass timber manufacturing facility in the United States, just down the street in Columbia Falls, Montana.
So you were there kind of all the way back in the beginning of the domestic U.S. production of mass timber. What's that arc kind of looked like since then? Where has mass timber been, and where's it going?
Yeah, so we do like to think of ourselves as being there at the genesis, at the inception with that first import, and it was a long, difficult journey, because you're talking about industries that aren't necessarily known for innovation or increases in efficiency in the sawmilling industry, wood processing, and certainly construction. Now it's changing. But those are not easy industries to convince that it's time for a change. And we really suffered from this chicken and the egg. We found a lot of interest from the market, but everyone wanted to see the product. Well, you can't see the product until you build a facility, and you can't really build a facility until you have customers. And that was a really, really difficult chicken and the egg. And that's really what forced us to leverage the import model that the Austrians in particular encouraged us, because it also fulfilled their mission to test the waters in the US with maybe the idea that they would come here someday. And so they were very supportive of us importing and sort of jump-starting the industry. And that enabled us to get enough traction with investors to build the SmartLam facility in Montana. The trajectory, to specifically answer your question today, and I have this in my presentations as I show the European trajectory that's capping out at about, not capping out, but we'll be reaching in excess of 3 million cubic meters in 2023. And that's just CLT output in Europe. So, takes 600 board feet to make a cubic meter. So 3 million times 600 is how many board feet are going into just this product. That's not including GlueLam or ParaLam, DuoLam, LVL, other engineered wood products. It's just the CLT cross section. And if you overlay that European growth curve with the US growth curve, you can see that we've cleared what we call crossing the chasm in the entrepreneurial world. And we're entering into the same steep trajectory as the Europeans hit. It's just that we're about 10 to 12 years behind. And interestingly enough, we did that long haul project in Whitefish in 2011. People ask me, well, where are we on the European curve? And I would point on a volumetric basis to the intersection that's right around 2011. So we're catching up. We're still about a decade behind, but we're following that trajectory. So for me, that says, we're not going to stop now. We've reached the tipping point, and we're going to get into a near vertical growth curve over the next 10 years.
With some of the I guess the epiphanies or the light bulb moments or the early days of SmartLam, what did you learn back in the day that maybe people are doing a little bit better in this day and age, or do they really have like a great, design right now that they're just keep pushing forward with?
Well, SmartLam was a bit of an anomaly because we cobbled that thing together on a shoestring budget. We mixed both new and used equipment and put together a really, really basic entry-level line. We were not even making a construction grade material. We came up with a secondary application that is really what spawned Sterling. Ultimately, we were making CLT mats, and we sold some to Sterling, and they said, hey, this is cool. And they ended up building a whole plant to make nothing but mats out of CLT. So what I encourage the factories to do now is to invest in European caliber automation and not try to reinvent the wheel, not knocking domestic manufacturers. I'm just accentuating the experience of the Europeans. And they're, the fact that they're 30 years into this, and automation has made them efficient, really efficient. And it's all about being as efficient as possible and creating the least amount of waste to make you competitive. So I really try to encourage the plants that are now upgrading and particularly focusing on GlueLam, because everybody really kind of underestimated and didn't understand the complexity of the GlueLam piece of this whole equation. Everybody got really frothy about CLT, and the GlueLam kind of became an afterthought. And now certainly virtually everybody is backpedaling and investing significantly in GlueLam. The poster child of that is SmartLam, and a 90 million board foot automated line down in Dothan, Alabama, to address that challenge. So I would encourage people to cast a wide net and don't be afraid of the technology and the experience of our European counterparts. And like I mentioned to you guys in the preamble, the BenderHols family has bought 1.5 billion board feet worth of sawmilling capacity in Live Oak, Florida, and Enfield, North Carolina, because they understand that critical supply chain integration that is mostly lacking in the US and Canada. And now they're going to be bringing what will very likely be the largest, most sophisticated mass timber component manufacturing facility to North America. And it's going to be a game changer because it's going to be the most efficient and most competitive factory. And again, I'm not knocking the domestic producers because I work with all of them every day. And, we're all, spreading the wealth and working around, but that's going to be a seminal moment when they start cutting different thicknesses of lamstock versus the 2x that we traditionally do here, and give the designers a broader palette of dimensions and thicknesses. And it'll all be Southern pine, which is, one of the really exciting things about the last few years is the advent of being able to use Southern pine, because it's such a tremendously fast growing renewable resource and such a great candidate for mass timber.
You had mentioned the shift in focus from CLT to GlueLam, or maybe just incorporating GlueLam in with a CLT focus. Are you talking about the production of GlueLam, the certain types that it's made, or are you talking more on the fabrication piece of that side?
Well, I can tell you, if you look at it as a 3-part process, it's all of the above. Procurement. So, this whole conversation starts with the wood basket, right? People come to me or come to us and say, well, we want to build a plant in Texas, or we want to build a plant in Maine. And the first thing you have to look at is, do you have the fiber? And in those two examples, the quick answer is yes. Then you have to look at the sawmill infrastructure and who's cutting what. So if you have let's say you have a big GlueLam order with on a big project, and you need a 24F grade Southern yellow pine GlueLam in very significant volumes, tens of thousands of cubic meters. The layups of each of those cords in the GlueLam is a different grade and a different spec, and the most critical one is the bottom cord. In the South, it's a number 1 dense select in Southern pine. So if you have a huge order, you have to understand intimately how that grade is procured from who, and how long it takes to procure the volume that you need to, one, be commensurate or congruent with your manufacturing cadence, 2, your fabrication cadence, and 3, your installation cadence. So if a tremendous amount of that is not currently being cut because there's not enough demand for it, and you're not necessarily integrated with those mills, your procurement process may be a year or 2 in advance, and you have to pay for all that. And we've learned some of this, the hard way. And then the fabrication work may or may not, the primary CLT GlueLam manufacturer may or may not have the fabrication capabilities and capacities to do it, in which case it has to go to a secondary processor. So what they're doing to remedy this, to answer your question, is putting that all in the GlueLam plant. It's all specialist procurements, integration with the mills. SmartLam is really pioneering integration with the mills, so that they're scanning, grading, sorting, drying exactly what the CLT plant needs. And they'll have their own metal shop for the steel connection. They'll have their own CNC fabrication machines that are specifically dedicated to GlueLam, separate from the CNCs where you're running the CLT through. And I think you're going to see virtually everybody eventually doing that and being much more of a turnkey operation. And as I said, including the steel, because when you really get into the weeds, the magic of these buildings is how they're connected, how the timber is connected to concrete, connected to steel, and timber to timber. And if you can also provide that in-house, you're de-risking it for your clients, and you're just making the whole process less cumbersome with less third parties involved.
Yeah, I can definitely see what you're talking about there. And looking at shifting the conversation back to the second half of your answer, talking about vendors coming in and procuring all of that capacity in preparation for gearing up a new facility to produce mass timber. Where are you going to see pressure on the domestic market to innovate, to adopt, to kind of mimic these practices? Are you going to see like vendors come in and completely dominate the market demand, or are you going to see very quickly the domestic producers catch up with that type of innovation?
Well, I think they're already doing it organically, but when KLH, Bender, Stora Enso, Meyer Melma, Postlocker, Lehog started, really winning significant projects, I think the domestic manufacturer said, "Wow, we are still kind of archaic here, and we need to step up our game." Because if you again go back to the Bender example, and look, Element 5 is expanding, and Nordique is riding rock solid with huge backlog. Structure Lam is now getting buffed out by Mercer. Kalistnikov came out of the chute really hot as a really well organized, experienced operator with the fiber integration, their own timber, their own sawmill. So we all knew they were going to be successful right out of the chute. So again, everybody's doing well and everybody's responding to the market and increasing capacities and capabilities and efficiencies. I think take, for example, two of the largest mass timber projects in North America, the Ascent Tower in Milwaukee with Newland and the Intro with Harbor Bay in Cleveland, those two projects went to KLH and Bender, right? And I think that was kind of a wake up call, like, wow, the largest, most sophisticated projects just went to the Europeans. The domestic guys don't have the efficiencies to carve into their margins on these big projects as easily as the Europeans can do. You take a Bender, 600,000 cubic meters of CLT capacity alone, right? That's more than we're doing in, combined domestically, and likely will be for a couple more years. So if you're building $100 million factory in the United States and you just invested in 2 sawmills, going more aggressively on your pricing to win a project is a bit of a nuisance, but not priming the market for your arrival and having a potentially underutilized factory is potentially fatal, right? So they're doing what they know how to do best. They're leveraging their efficiencies and their automation, and they're competing. And, it's not making people happy, but, we're in the big leagues now. And I think it'll be good for everyone, because that was a kicker to really reinforce that everyone needs to reinvest and automate and increase efficiencies and capacities and capabilities.
So forgive me if I'm wrong, but I guess please correct me. BenderHols, they bought 2 sawmills, and that's what you were talking about. They have about a 1.5 billion annual board feet that they can produce in, what is it, Florida and North Carolina?
Yeah. And so again, they're not going to be doing 1.5 billion board feet of CLT and GlueLam, but what they really believe in is that integration with the sawmill and being able to lean on the sawmill or be able to tell the sawmill to cut a whole host of different lam stock thicknesses, right? Our whole PRG 320 standard here was really written. I'm not going to name any names, but it's not really a dirty little secret, but this whole industry was really driven by the sawmill sector, who said, hey, we can sell a whole lot more wood, which is good for everybody. But if we promote it in such a fashion that it's already that they're going to use what we're already making, we don't really have to do anything different. We can just sell more. So the whole PRG 320 standard was essentially written around the 2x. Everybody in North America cuts. You can buy it wider, or you can buy it narrower, but it's basically a 2x. And if you look at our 3-ply, 5-ply, 7-ply, it's all basically the thickness of 3, 5, or 7, 2x stacked up minus the planing that occurs. The Europeans have a much, much deeper quiver of panel thicknesses because the integration with the sawmills allows them to cut different thicknesses. So I can go down to a 20 mil thickness lam stock on a 3-ply and get a 60 millimeter thick 3-ply, because I may not need a 105 millimeter 3-ply. Take, for example, if I'm putting together some CLT based accessory dwelling units, which we happen to be doing on the side because it's a hot market, and CLT makes so much sense for prefab and modular. And so why not start with these accessory dwelling units that are just really hot all over, as jurisdictions approve them for all the reasons why they make sense. So if I'm putting together those, I don't need a 105 millimeter 3-ply. I can get away with far less thick panels, 60s, 80s, 100s, 120s, and shave all that volume, which is money, out of the unit, right? And, all the cost assessments and budgeting around mass timber is really a volumetric exercise, almost in how little can we get in there to drive the cost of the premium of the material down, so it's more competitive with, the conventional materials. And that's very market specific. And, the speed of build and some of the other attributes help us build a more holistic and compelling business case, but it's really a volumetric exercise. And so if I'm a designer or an engineer and I have a much broader spectrum of thicknesses and subsequent volumes I can use, I can be more competitive, And so I've lost jobs to the Europeans on this, and I've won jobs with the Europeans on this. And that's where it's going to be a game changer in the market.
Well, and it's a two-part question. So BenderHols has started bulldozing their money and their capital forward. They're actively buying sawmills, and they're also building a CLT plant. And they're about 2 years out, if I'm not mistaken, right? Until that's live and up and running and producing.
The mills are up and running because they picked them up in a state of where that was already basically happening, but they are tweaking them to meet their specifications. So those mills are up and running and selling commodity dimension lumber and doing all the things that typical Southern yellow pine sawmills do. The latest update I had was that it would be about 2 more years until the value added processing is happening. And it's likely they'll bring their prefab and modular, much like I was just describing. They've advanced that part because, what we learned at Katerra and in the couple of years that I was there was, that was what we were trying to do, is if we're going to embrace this offsite manufacturing, offsite prefabrication, why stop there? Why wouldn't we continue to add value and do more prefab and more modular solutions where they make sense, and replicable typologies, replicable chassis and multifamily, replicable grids and column base in office. And if you go to Europe and you study where the offtake of the CLT in particular is going, you'll find that many of the vendors are sending a significant volume, up 50% in some instances, out the door as a blank and into prefab and modular shops. And that's a really, really healthy symbiotic relationship, because if you're a factory and you can ship 50% of your stuff out the door as a blank or as a billet, no design, no engineering, essentially no project management, and it doesn't require a whole bunch of fussy CNC work, which is super slow, then, that's like a dream. That's a factory dream. And so when they discovered that, some of them, they said, well, why are we doing this? And now many of them have their own branded internal prefab and modular businesses that are consuming their own product, but adding the value and, creating more margin contributions. So I think, I want to be part of that here because I want to keep innovating. So that's, one thing we're doing is going down the modular and prefab path and seeing, which markets we can embrace. And these ADUs, for example, they caught on with a ski resort and they said, we'll take a couple hundred for workforce housing. That wasn't our intention, but you never know when you get an innovative customer that's the poster child for climate change and wants a high performance building and has challenges with workforce housing, because nobody can live within 75 miles of a fancy Western ski resort. All of a sudden you stumbled onto a whole new niche that, has broad appeal for the next innovation.
So knowing that BenderHols is one example, and you rattled off, 5 or 6 other European big name companies, do you think that the landscape for the United States and the overall mass timber production is going to be vastly different in a 5-year game plan? Or are we even talking more on the horizon of 2 years to 3 years? There's going to be an incredible amount of volume that's going to be unlocked because of the infrastructures are being built right now.
Yeah, I think you have to look at, I think the market is going to continue to grow. I really do. And I think the urgency is going to continue to grow. And I think we have, some of the world's most vast timber resources and most rapidly renewable timber resources. And again, that Southern pine swath is an example, but I think the market's going to continue to grow. production will continue to grow to meet market demand for sure. Nobody's going to miss out on that opportunity. But you have to look at the timber baskets. And if you start to look around and plant the existing manufacturers where they are around the country, there's really not too many places left where you would likely situate a significant mass timber manufacturing facility. You look at, I alluded to this earlier, Maine, you look at East Texas. You know, the Europeans are coming to the Southeast. We have a plant in Alabama. We have a plant in Arkansas. I'm sure we'll see one in Northern California. We've got two in Washington, Western Canada, and Eastern Canada. So there's just not a lot of likely candidates. What I do think we will see is the addition of more fabrication capabilities. You know, there's the Souter Timber of the world, who started using CNC machine to mill good old fashioned timber frame packages. And the timber framers were like, this is the coolest thing since sliced bread, because this thing's been through a robot and it's going to go together like a jigsaw puzzle on site. Timberline down in Texas, rebranding themselves, used to be Texas Timber Frames. We used them on the Southstone Yards job in Frisco, Texas recently, to do the fabrication work for SmartLam. Great partner. I think there's going to be an opportunity for more of those fabricators. And I think there will be a secondary opportunity for them in smaller projects. I don't think a week goes by, I don't get a call from 2 or 3 people who are like, I can't get anyone's attention. I think my job is too small. And I have to say, well, your job is too small. And nobody has the time or the bandwidth or the personnel to hold your hand and design a little single family home for your, weekend getaway. But I think that, that is a market that will evolve. And again, I think offering some prefabricated existing designed units is going to test that market. And if the uptake is there, then I think there'll be a huge opportunity for these fabricators / installers to offer similar packages to a more residential market. And, again, the industry was particularly in Canada, was very specific in not talking about residential construction with mass timber, because there was this, I think, short-sighted fear that they were going to cannibalize stick frame construction in residential with mass timber, which is just never going to happen. Stick frame is lowest common denominator. It's a great solution, works great for North America, but mass timber will never be able to compete in that segment unless people are willing to pay a premium for performance, speed of build, modularity, prefabrication, whatever it is that drives them away from stick framing. So I think you're going to see a residential movement gain hold and see some stakeholders emerge there as being successful capturing that new niche market.
Absolutely agree. Nick and I got into the whole mass timber industry on that very premise. We were looking for something different. We were looking to try and build residential ADUs or a small multifamily with mass timber. And we went to people in the industry maybe early 2021, and everybody told us we were crazy and it was never going to happen. Put it on the back burner. And it took us quite a few people, quite a few manufacturers, architects, engineers, before we linked up with people that actually wanted to. One, had the capacity that they could do it, but 2, also wanted to. And now I think we're seeing that conversation shift a lot. Like you talked about, becoming a much bigger part of the conversation, whether that's prefabbed or producers or prefab manufacturers, just kind of looking at that from the get-go. So I know that there's a couple small producers or plans to have CLT producers that are solely focused on the residential space, whether that's like small single family ADU or small multifamily, but they're focusing on residential from the start. Do you see in the arc that we're going into, or excuse me, that hockey stick curve that you were talking about, where are we going to see the most disruption in the mass timber industry?
Where do you think mass timber is going to disrupt the market?
Yes, or existing building technology.
Yeah. I mean, I think that disruption has begun because, the fact that we are displacing concrete and steel in significant commercial structures is with, an engineered wood product is a disruption that I don't think a lot of people would have predicted that didn't really maybe know what was going on in Europe. So the fact that, we're knocking out 250,000 square foot, 7-story office buildings in 16 weeks for an erected timber superstructure and taking out, and don't get me wrong, there's still a lot of concrete and steel in these buildings, but we are displacing a significant volume and answering the call to reduce, our carbon footprint and displace high embodied energy materials like concrete and steel. So, that's big. There's a long way to go. We still put a lot of concrete and steel in these buildings. The cores still tend to be concrete. We're still pouring concrete, on top for sound and to some extent vibration. So, it's already here. The question is, where else is it going to impact us? So, there are typologies coming at us that I would have laughed you out of the room a couple of years ago if you had said, we're looking at 500,000 square feet of a data center in a hybrid steel mass timber condition. So basically putting 5-ply, 175 mil, 5-ply CLT plates on top of a steel deck in a 2-story, data center. Like if you, I'm going to say it again, if you told me that a couple of years ago, I would have laughed you out of the room, because it's hard to make a case for that unless your carbon mandate for your company, and you can think of the usual suspects when I'm talking about a data center, unless that mandate is so important and so urgent and so tangible, that you look at every possible avenue for sucking carbon out of your supply chain, then, that would otherwise never happen. And so the way it needed to manifest itself was in some sort of hybrid, because you're not going to put GlueLam, superstructure into a data center. It really needs to be steel for spans. But the CLT deck, worked really well on top of that. In fact, the connection details for CLT over steel are incredibly simple compared to super complicated, GlueLam to GlueLam, GlueLam to concrete connection details. This is actually a very, very simple, and it's going to be a crazy fast install. We're thinking in this condition, it could be 12 to 15,000 square feet a day to be installed, just because the CLT is going to be so fast on top of the steel. So, and then other sectors where there hasn't been much discussion, but it makes sense when you think about like life sciences, pharmaceutical, health and wellness, hospitals, ambulatory, places where they too have those sustainability initiatives, but also the biophilic attributes that are really becoming very legitimate. And I was one of the first to roll my eyes when I started hearing about this biophilic stuff years ago. But now that they're studying this in more advanced markets where they have decades in these buildings, again, going back to the well and the Europeans, that response that we have, they're studying this in schools primarily, because in schools you have access to kids, students, college students, staff, admin, and faculty. You get a really nice cross-section of people. And the results are astounding. Test scores are up. ADD is down. Anxiety is down. Blood pressure is down. Heart rate is down. Attendance is up. General feelings of health and wellness are improving. And so those attributes translate not only in the school, sector, but also in these other companies that are touting lifestyles where we're supposed to be, living well and living healthy. And so there's a lot of big players in those sectors coming at us saying, hey, what makes sense? Here's our capital planning projects. What makes sense to look at, mass timber. So I think there's just going to be continued disruption. But I think from a building materials perspective, that disruption has already started, and that's really focusing on using more timber and less concrete and steel.
For sure. I couldn't agree more. One of the things that you talked about was the speed of construction. And we've talked a lot about the manufacturing side of things. You got some deep roots over there, but now you're wearing that contractor GC hat. and you're assembling and constructing these buildings. How did you make that jump, and what are you doing now?
People have heard me say this before, but there's so many better ways to make money than gluing boards together. I and it's a tough business because there's so many disciplines that have to come together to support projects. And the whole process, as I like to say, from tree to key is, and on the mass timber manufacturing side is a real meat grinder. And the amount of personnel required to support the volume of projects that are needed to satiate these factories and keep them full was more. They need more personnel than they thought. And so the personnel is growing to support more projects. And, you're eroding your margins, and this is what's also driving more automation and efficiency, because they just have to be more efficient and let personnel work on more jobs rather than doing everything more manually. So I got a call from Structure Tone, and they said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, if you want to do this, then I would write a business plan around getting a big contractor like this up and running on mass timber, and let's go after some jobs." And we've landed some big jobs as a consultant on interviews, wrote a business plan, wrote a job description, and jumped right in. And frankly, it's been a great transition to answer your question in a very long-winded way, because I know the factory side so well. And now I have the freedom to help clients and architects and engineers and installers and all of our companies navigate that whole world that I came from. And I'm not stuck representing one factory. I can cherry pick whoever makes the most sense based on how big is it? When do they need it? Where is it? What's the species that they may or may not have an affinity for? And, do the thumb puzzle of who's going to make the most sense, and then help, quarterback the whole discussion. And it's a great position for me, because it's a bit of an anomaly, because, general contractors are generally very focused on corralling their subs, being very hard, putting their feet to the fire. And I get to be a buffer between the factory and the factory saying, "Hey, we told you that, it was going to be this schedule and this much money, and here's why." And I can communicate that very effectively back to the contractor, back to the client, back to the architect, and vice versa, and act as a very unique communication hub to keep everything on track. And even before that, to be really proactive. And I said this to an interview the other day. I said, "Listen, here's the deal with me. I'm going to tell you some things today in this 3-hour interrogation that we're going to endure in a poorly air-conditioned site trailer. Then I'm going to tell you some things you probably already know. I'm going to tell you some things that I'm guessing you don't know. But most importantly, I'm going to tell you some things that you probably don't want to hear." This is me talking to a client, and let's just say it's a big client. But I said, that's my job now, because my job is to set your expectation accordingly and then manage that expectation as we go down this path together, because it's a very, very collaborative endeavor, these things. And that's my job. And I'd rather now, because it's all about schedule and budget and schedule, than, 6 months, 11 months down the road when something goes wrong and I didn't tell you how to avoid that, how to navigate that. And that's been very well received. Some people don't like me. Sorry, I see we're getting some afternoon sun here. Some people don't like, to hear that, but I think most of the professionals really appreciate that at the end of the day. And so, yeah, it's a unique role, but it's certainly being well received, and I'm certainly enjoying doing it for sure.
It's interesting what you said, because, and I know that, Greg Kingsley very well with KLNA engineers and builders out in Denver. But one of the points that he talked about was they look at about 400 to 500 projects a year, and almost every single one of them now, mass timber is an absolute discussion with the client. And then you have, massive companies like yourself at Structure Tone, a $12 billion international juggernaut type of company that has a full-on mass timber division, that are really pushing the envelope forward. What are some of your biggest projects, or maybe, even coolest projects, or what are some projects that stand out to you that you've done at Structure Tone?
Yeah, well, we're just getting into it. The most recent start to finish that I was involved with was the Southstone Yards in Frisco, Texas. First of its kind in North Texas, 7-story, 250,000 square foot Southern Yellow Pine. So by far the largest Southern Pine project, and was sourced out of Alabama with SmartLam. They wanted to sort of introduce the fact that it's a timber building by using exterior GlueLam columns on some of the balconies. So we helped them specify Alaskan yellow cedar for just, weather and environmental resilience. It's with Crow Holdings out of Dallas. So, very, very top tier blue chip developer that is now deeply committed to doing more mass timber after their first one, and really believe in the whole story. So that one is exciting. Structured Tone is working on a second project at Clemson. So the first project there I was part of years ago, the outdoor wellness and rec center. There's a second project at Clemson that one of our family companies, Ajax, is working on in Lahotsky Hall, which is a cool mass timber project. We did an office 1-story with future expansion modularity for L'Oreal in New Jersey. We just had some other clients tour that. And we've got a lot of things percolating and that are in pursuit and design build that we can't really get into yet, but suffice to say it's a busy time.
So real quick though, so for people to know, you're a general contractor. People come to you to install. I mean, what facets of the construction site are you an expert in?
Well, as an international GC or CM, construction manager, we provide the umbrella construction services. We don't self-perform those. So when you say install, we are not installing the timber. Generally, the larger you get, the more risk you have in self-performing any of these trades. So we subcontract out all the trades, and we manage the project for the client. There's different delivery models, guaranteed maximum price, lump sum, integrated project delivery, design build, design bid build. Design build is particularly well suited for mass timber because you've got your team together from inception and you can collaborate a little bit more intimately. But yeah, so each of our companies is now cross-pollinating with each other on mass timber lessons learned. Dallas being sort of the epicenter of that, because that's where most of our experience comes from those two big recent projects in Arkansas and in Texas.
So you've been able to go through like that entire arc. We talked about manufacturing. You've taken that experience and you're bringing it to Structured Tone now on the construction side. Now that you've had the opportunity to work on some really, really massive mass timber projects with Structured Tone, are there any light bulb moments, any projects or insights that really kind of changed your way of thinking, changed your understanding of this whole mass timber thing?
I don't know if there have been a lot of light bulbs, but I would say there has been a lot of reinforcing and amplifying of much of what we've been preaching for the last years, which is design the building from inception for mass timber. It can't be an afterthought for a parallel design to some other building. And yeah, maybe we'll go that route. And in order to do that, you have to assemble the right team. And a lot of developers have gone out and they just go back to the well with their existing comfortable architects and engineers and owners reps. And then they realize they don't have the expertise. And then we have to add on another architect, and we have to add on another engineer, and we have to add on another installer. And the team gets very bloated and it gets very cumbersome, and it also gets very expensive. So, we've really tried to reinforce the idea that if you don't know who to talk to, let us, at the very least, make some introductions to the top design and engineering and installer people, and let's put the right team together from inception. And this is why the design build presentations that we've been doing to what I'd say are pretty sophisticated developers lately. The design build approach, where we've got the team assembled and we've invested in doing concept renderings and evaluating mechanical approach in floor. One developer said, "Hey, if I'm investing in this timber, why do I got to cover it all up with miles and miles of tin above my head in the mechanical system?" And we said, "Well, you don't. Quick answer is we can do an in-floor system and reduce all that overhead, view." So coming clients with the right team, or letting us introduce the right team, and then kind of cherry picking. We did some design builds where they liked another design build team, but we got the construction and they gave us the architects from that other team. So they kind of scrambled it and put together ultimately what I think is an even better team. So they heard the messaging about design build and they took it another level. They said, "Fine, we believe you, but here's who we want." And understanding who makes, over to manufacturing now, understanding who makes what, where, how, with what species, and what are they good at, what are they okay at, and what are they bad at. And, again, I'll go back to the GlueLam. We had to really, really evaluate when we switched factories on Southstone, for example. We didn't have those efficiencies because we just changed horses, right? So we had to really delve into what can you make on the automated press? What can you make on the cold press? And what can you make that you have to block glue that's just brutally manual and horrifically inefficient? Because we don't want to be there. We ended up making 2 beams for every big beam that we had in the first design profile, because making 2 smaller ones was far more efficient, as an example. And so really understanding the nuances of manufacturing, and not just what they're doing today, but what are they going to be doing when they're done with their expansion and their increase in efficiencies, and knowing the personnel and having those relationships is just huge, because you just got to be able to, in the email riptide, sometimes you just got to pick up the phone and call somebody and say, "Hey, let's just hash this out." And so, relationships, understanding the manufacturing, again, understanding the tree to key process and being able to articulate that to clients. So it's all those things. I wouldn't say there've been a ton of light bulb moments. It's just, which I think maybe is a good sign, because it's nice to see that everything that we thought we already knew is being reinforced and amplified on these projects.
What do you wish more people knew about mass timber?
Boy, that's a whole nother hour, man. I think, at least for me, like, the whole story to me is so compelling. And there's just not too many that I think have that unique perspective and can tell the whole story about how it all works, but also in the theme of what we're doing today is where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. And so, because the reason I say that is because the whole story, I think, is just so compelling, and there's something in it for everyone. One of the really cool things that I learned in Arkansas, and this is in the context of today's, just divisive political arguments where we're really not getting anything done. I realized in Arkansas that we had a story that, as one U.S. representative who went to Yale School of Forestry, Bruce Westerman, said, "Pete, this is a fantastic story that crosses the aisle." And in an era where we're desperate for anything, where somebody can reach across the aisle and agree that there's something in this for everyone, right? There's an environmental story, there's jobs, there's technology, there's manufacturing, there's carbon. And this is why it's so so appealing to university campuses because they want to check all those boxes. So I think more being able to get the word, being able to tell the whole story to broader audiences, I think is, and it's, it's starting to happen, I think would be really important. And then I think, we're starting to work with the universities on curriculum development, right? If we're putting these buildings on university campuses, then why in the world are we not including the next generation of architects and engineers and construction sciences, people, students in that? And that really came to us in Arkansas when these students would come up after presentations and say, tell us more. What is this sustainability you're talking about? Give me an example. And the students really drove that dialogue. And so, Clemson, Pat Layton, at the Wood Utilization Design Institute, Virginia Tech, Peter McKeith at Fay Jones School of Architecture in Arkansas. These folks are all pioneering buildings on their campuses and developing curriculum. And I think you're going to see more and more of that. And we need it. There is a very small pool of candidates in North America, people who really understand this process and can run CNC machines and do, 2D shop drawings and digital twins and, the whole process. So we need more knowledge base coming out of these schools. So I think more promotion of that. And again, going back to Arkansas, we got a timberland owner so excited about mass timber in an effort to do vertical integration. He donated $10 million to the school for another building, for material and innovation research. And, that's an exciting model for other schools. The whole land grant, program that a lot of these public schools are, which land grant I had forgotten means that, you're supposed to be promoting research and innovation that spawns new technology and subsequently new companies that start in your state that increases the tax base and comes back and fuels the school for, in a circular economy. And, that's just a fantastic story. And I think there's more of those, I know, because we're involved in them. But I think, again, more storytelling and narrating that, crafting that narrative and inspiring people to do that, I think is what I'm hopeful we're going to see more of.
Yeah, that's exciting. It's pretty crazy how fast we all grow up, and then we start running things, and then all of a sudden the children's children are already running things. Well, to talk about a little bit of the curriculum, and that's, half the reason me and Brady have the networking and education event annually out here in Denver is to educate people and get people in the right room with the right people to build mass timber. To speak just a little bit more on like the curriculum, does Structure Tone, do they have any, are you like working hand in hand with people to build curriculum, or what does that look like?
I wouldn't say hand in hand. I say that, our job is to share knowledge, cross-pollinate, inspire, make available resources, tours, samples, life cycle assessments, all the things could be integrated into that. So we make ourselves available as resources. I'd love to, I've proposed, and it's been well received, to take some of these timber accessory dwelling units and put them on a campus for a semester and build an architectural studio, not a physical studio, but a design studio around one of these buildings, and teach a whole class about the whole story, the carbon, the offsite manufacturing, the performance of the building, the U values. We need to start educating about U value instead of R value, and start talking about operational carbon, and that kind of stuff. So we make ourselves available, but you can't get too in the weeds with these universities because they're pretty specific and deliberate in how they do their stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like you guys have got a lot on your plate, a lot that you guys are looking forward to in the future. What's next for Pete? What are you after? What are you hoping to achieve in the next X amount of years?
Well, I think it's just more of the same, and keep innovating and keep driving new sectors to the table and inspiring architects to keep pushing clients to innovate and try new topologies and try new things. and, try to lead by example by, pushing the prefab and the modular out into the market, and just growing our business and growing our relationships. And, for a guy my age at this point, it's about, meaningful work and meaningful relationships, honestly. And this industry has attracted just world-class, high caliber people. There's nobody that I've met that's passionate about this, that I'm not close with and fond of, and have great, respect for and learn from. So I think it's just keep pushing on all fronts. Don't let the momentum slide. Keep pushing, the feds and the states to be supportive. USDA has been fantastic with grant money, and Forest Service. Softwood Lumber Board has been fantastic. Just the open and transparent collaboration of the the competitors, and this transparency of some of the developers. New Land Enterprises, Boris and Tim Gochman, have been huge champions of the industry, and have been incredibly transparent about how they went about building a 25-story mass timber building and breaking records, and having never done it before. Immigrant family, and and they want to replicate it, and they've been so transparent and have shared because it's the right thing to do. And I guess I'll kind of wind down here, but when the Europeans took me under their wings years ago and said, here's some lessons learned, and here's, and this went on and on and on. And I said, eventually, why are you sharing this all with me? I mean, you're giving me trade secrets, and you're telling me things that I would have taken me decades to figure out. And some of my Austrian friends said, well, that Mercedes-Benz has never enforced the safety patents on the car. And I said, I didn't know that. And they said, well, do you know why? And I said, no. And they said, because it's the right thing to do. Mm. And I said, wow, that's pretty cool. And they said, so if you want to do this, and you want to go do it over there, and you want to change the world, and you want to play your part, and we can share with you and help advance that, then it's the right thing to do. And, that was really powerful, to have a family that's, growing $1 billion industry now say, here you go. Now, of course, fast forward 10 years later, here they come, because we've been helping them build the market. Right. So it wasn't entirely without an agenda, but still pretty powerful moment for me. And then I've tried to have that reinforce everything that I do, and be as transparent as we can, to promote the industry.
Speaking about teachers and people that take you under their wing and give you those trade secrets, you talk about Europeans, but is there anyone, maybe a couple of people that come to mind specifically that would just inspire you in the industry, or was just a big mentor in the industry?
Well, it's been a lot of people, but certainly the Bender brothers and Reinhard Bender over in Austria, and some of his colleagues, Helmut Spies, but certainly the pioneers like Craig Curtis, Tom Robinson, who we were talking about earlier, Bernard Gaffner at Aspect, Robert Malchek, formerly at Equilibrium, now at Timber Engineering, Eric Karsh, Kantner at Equilibrium, all the guys running these factories, Jason Herman at Mercer now, the guys up at Element 5, Patrick Chenard, Patrick Pouland, Lee Scott. I mean, I could go on and on, right? There's just a million people that hopefully I inspired, but also inspired me. Yeah, I mean, it's an inspirational journey that, we're all on, and it seems to be catching on, so that's really exciting.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There's an incredible cast of people in this industry. It's kind of something I hadn't experienced before, but, walking into rooms being nobodies, just being tiny little residential infill stick frame developer owners, and knowing nothing outside of who to write checks to, we just felt incredibly welcomed in the entire mass timber industry.
Yeah.
People were willing to talk to us.
you go to the timber conference and all of a sudden 8 years into it, Shigeru Ban and Jeannie Gang are keynoting this thing. And I mean, just, inspirational there were people who left that room in tears, and of course I left that room thinking, God, what a slacker I am. I haven't done anything compared to these people. But, yeah, and I think that just keeps a lot of us going, is that there's so many world-class people doing such important work, and more coming. So in fact, I'm reading, I'll show this one's been getting passed around by our group, and it's okay to plug a book.
Yeah.
There's a really, really well-known author, Jeff Goodell, and this is his most recent publication, the heat will kill you first. And it's a scary and urgent message. It's much more severe than even some of the most dire predictions. And the next generation needs to start reading this stuff and really step on the, I can't say step on the gas anymore, because that's part of the problem. But
what did you pull from the book?
Well, I have this problem where I read about 9 books simultaneously. And I'm reading one of Bill Bryson's books, and Roland Enos's book called The Age of Wood, which is just a fantastic history of how civilization has grown by largely in part by our use of wood and innovation around wood. But I think the most scary takeaway, and I'm only, 60 pages into it, was as temperatures rise, if and when we figure out how to stabilize that, there's no going back, right? So these new norms, we're cresting out. And, me working in Texas a lot, I don't do well in the heat. I live in Minnesota at 45 degrees north, and I'm thinking I'm not far enough north. I lived at 48 degrees in Montana. And I go down there and it's 110 degrees, and the guys have to start work at 4 a.m. and be done, at noon or 1 o'clock, because you just can't work. But there's no going back. So wherever we end up halting this thing or stabilizing it, that's the new floor. And it's not to say the ceiling isn't going to continue to rise, but there is no going back to normal. And that was one of the early takeaways that really made me think, like, okay, we really don't have more time to keep arguing over this. We have to get serious about it. And I hear the news on in the background. We're more worried about impeaching another president than we are about doing anything meaningful. And, I just think there's a significant population that's going to be on the wrong side of history. And I think that's just unfortunate. And so anyway, not to end on a gloom and doom note, but I think it's a big driver in our industry, because it's a big part of our story. So.
Yeah. It's an incredibly, incredibly important issue that needs to be faced. And I think that you're doing the exact right thing, is by spreading awareness, by talking about it, by actually being a part of the solution, by doing the things that move that needle, and helping others do that too. And on that note, Nick and I are very, very supportive and encouraging of people to reach out and connect with people. So how can people get a hold of you? How can people get a hold of Structure Tone? How can people talk to you guys about doing mass timber projects?
Well, you can find Structure Tone in every market in North America. You can find local business development and other resources on any of the Structure Tone websites. I think what you guys are doing is you are a great hub and spoke system for connecting people, and I do a lot of that. I may not know a lot, but I sure know a lot of people, and I'm also I've become a big LinkedIn guy. I'm on LinkedIn, and I got pretty good network, and a lot of people reach out and find me there. But my email at Structure Tone is just pete.kobelt@structuretone.com, and maybe we can attach that to this. And happy to field calls all the time, spontaneous. We don't have to book meetings 6 months in advance to talk for 15 minutes. But either through Structure Tone, LinkedIn, or directly, or through you guys, or through anybody, if they're having a conversation and they want to a more holistic discussion. If they mention my name, whoever they're talking to about mass timber probably knows me and I know them, and we can connect organically that way too.
Perfect. All right. So we covered a lot of ground, but we have one more question for you. It's a little bit of lighter tone. If you had a magic wand and you can wave it and change one thing about your industry, what would you change and why?
Um, if I could change one thing, I think I would go back in time and get a cleaner, more significant start. And I certainly wouldn't have been making mats out of CLT that we could throw in mud and frack for more oil. But that's sort of personal PTSD. And sometimes that's the way things have to manifest themselves. But I think I would go back in time and I would get us off to a better, cleaner, faster start. And if I could bring my knowledge from today back, I would have done that, because I think we could have avoided some spectacular flameouts that we just witnessed. Fortunately, I think we've done a remarkable job of recovering very quickly and without much disruption or apprehension in the market. But I think I'd go back and attack it a little differently and get some more skilled heavy hitters into the game from day one.
Well, you're a breath of fresh air with all your projects that you're doing, and especially just saying it straight, like what's to come and, the realities of mass timber, like you said, sitting your clients down in a room and say, hey, we're going to play some hardball, but I'd rather what's going on the front end, so you don't get burned or hurt on the back end. Thank you so much for this interview. We can't wait to see what future projects you have under your belt, and I'm sure we'll see you around.
Well, thank you guys, and keep up the great work. Your name is really spreading and everybody's talking about it. It's long overdue. So keep it up and we'll stay in touch.
Thanks, man. Take care.